I press record.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a very special edition of the Give and Go podcast. Unique times, COVID-19, so unique circumstances, and a unique setup. We were finally in 2020 with a very special episode for you guys here on video. It's your host, Bandito Khan, aka BK, aka Bandit the Boy Wonder, and I'll let my man introduce himself over here.
You should have just pointed over to me, like make this interactive. Like, oh, thanks, man, appreciate it. It's your boy,
Still
man,
Luddites.
Mohsin Khan, MK15. I forgot what my nicknames were. Whatever, man. You know, everyone's equal during this pandemic.
I was gonna say, I think it's stripped us all to our bare realities, right? So all these monikers and nicknames could probably go by the wayside.
For sure.
How you been though, man? How's life treating you in quarantine or isolation or whatever it may be?
Things are good, man. I mean, we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to sports. Hopefully, and that's something that we'll talk about, I guess, later today. But things are good, man. Things are good. I got my health. I got my pop toys. I got, if you see, that's our discussion. Our discussion for today, Michael Jordan, The Last Dance. That just aired and that just finished. And we spoke about that 2 years ago on our podcast, and it's done. It's finished. It's over.
Right? Kind of surreal. I see Kobe Bryant over there as well, too.
Kobe Bryant, yes, spot from New York.
Yeah, funny story there. When Most and I were in New York, we're at the NBA store, which, you know, for any fanboys, it's somewhere, you know, you definitely want to head up. It's really cool. But this was April of last year, 2019,
right?
And there was a whole wall of Kobe Bryant pop toys. But something about it just didn't attract me for whatever reason. I was really mulling over buying a Penny Hardaway jersey, and I just kind of ignored the whole Kobe pop. And now if you go and you try to buy it, I don't know why, Kobe Bryant's probably my favorite player, you know, in terms
ever, man.
Ever, yeah, in real time.
Yeah, for real.
My favorite player, right? And
I mean, there's a point that you were basically Kobe Bryant, like in the mid 2000s.
I don't even like to say that. But also, and I don't know how much of this will materialize on today's call or today's little conference over here. I think we discussed, you know, potentially kind of just bringing in the whole world, all the kind of stuff that we're into. You know, it's not just basketball. I mean, a lot of it's basketball, but you know, you'll see Bret the Hitman Hart up here. There's historical pro wrestling. We're both reading fucking Dune right now. We're not going to talk to you guys about that. Don't worry. But there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and you know, I think especially with quarantine, there might be a good time throughout the weeks to just kind of catch up on everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's no sports going on, right? I think
MMA happened, right? The UFC happened.
This I mean, other than MMA, I mean, and I guess pro wrestling, which is another topic of du jour, so to say. But the thing is, with sports and everything, give and go, we wanted to be able to get our NBA thoughts out there. But yes, there's a lot of other different things that we can broach while we're still waiting for basketball to come back. And I mean, that's something that you might see in the coming weeks.
Yeah, if you couldn't discern by Mohsin's backdrop over there, he does have other interests as well, too.
I do.
All represented by a variety of Funko Pop toys.
Hey, man.
I see Ryu, Ken, Raiden out there, Blanca,
the worst thing
Spider-Man, Venom.
Yeah. The worst thing someone did was gift me one 4 years ago.
That's a domino effect.
Yeah, domino effect. This is what happens.
So our producer, Mos, has sent me a bunch of notes over here about kind of some of the things he wants to talk about. I guess, you know, despite there being no sports yet, there seems to be a lot of, you know, matters of discussion. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with NBA's potential return, or do you want to start with, Last Dance?
I think we should start with what a lot of people wanted to hear, our thoughts on the last Dance.
Okay.
I think, you know, it was one of the bigger basketball stories over the last month or so.
It was the basketball story. It was
it was the 90s all over again for 5 weeks, and every single social media outlet, every podcast, everything was about Michael Jordan. Even leading up to it, everything was about Michael Jordan, especially with the lack of NBA.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are just dying to hear what we think of The Last Dance. And I mean, it isn't all roses. I do know there are some criticisms on both of our ends. But for the most part, what'd you think?
No, yeah, absolutely, right. You're right that it took over the basketball world and the sports world. And I think, you know, what was kind of cool to begin with too is that it brought a lot of light, not just to Michael Jordan, but to the era in general, right? Like you see sort of Charles Barkley trending again, and
Yeah.
you know, we'll get into that. Some of the different players that you talked about. What I thought about it, I enjoyed it. It was kind of everything I expected it to be, and everything in many regards that I don't want to say I wanted it to, but everything I expected it to be. I expected a celebration of Michael Jordan's career.
Okay.
And I think it's important, for older guys like us and who are a little bit long in the tooth, to recognize, sorry, that's to recognize that when we grew up, there was a lot of hoopla about Michael Jordan. There's a lot of, home videos, and, I did book reports on books about Michael Jordan and in elementary school, et cetera, that we've kind of been told the story and we've been told the narrative. And, there's a lot of people that are sub 30 years old today that just aren't familiar with that story. So I thought the documentary or the celebration was really good in that regard, that it brought that story to so many who hadn't witnessed, or not even witnessed, but haven't been exposed to the legend of Michael Jordan. In
Sure.
that regard, that's everything I expected it to be.
For sure.
What I maybe didn't expect was, I think I found a lot of people really kind of taking Michael Jordan's words for gospel, right? And while I agree with Larry Bird when he characterizes him as, that wasn't Michael Jordan up there, that's God, disguised Michael Jordan, but that gospel primarily exists in the hardwood and not necessarily on, an individual's own narrative about his career. But no, I thought it was good. But what did you think, man? I mean, it was a lot of fun.
I loved it. I mean, obviously, always experiencing the 90s as a kid, it's completely different. But then having a chance to not only see him recollect and look back on his career a bit and give us a little bit of insight into, his mindset and in terms of how he approached the game, and hearing him sort of talk about all these myths, all these legends, all these things that we've heard, things that may not be true, things that were rumors, things that were, stories that we want him to expand on. I think it was interesting to hear that. Also similar to what you said, but there's a lot of people that just don't know about Michael Jordan. There's a lot of kids. There's a lot of people that are born in the 2000s. Like, a lot of the rookie classes for the last 3 years, these guys didn't grow up watching Michael Jordan. So to be able to see that and to be able to see what he was about, and to show that he's more than just a meme or a crying Jordan or a shoe brand that just comes out every single year and has athletes signed under him. It just goes to show you that not only did he play a huge part in, he was the biggest part of the reason why the NBA is what it is, but just influencing where the game went and how the NBA grew. He has his hands all over that.
Yeah, and a couple of things to add to that. It's like you mentioned, you touched on how Michael was really the reason we have the NBA as we have it today. So naturally, as is sports, one of the big discussion points that have come from the documentary has been Jordan versus LeBron, a topic we've touched on ad nauseum in the past as well too, right?
Right.
And we could probably get into it a little bit later as well too. But despite what we think about what makes the GOAT and who would dominate in one era, what's unquestionable is that Michael Jordan's impact on the culture of the world of basketball, right? From our valuing of clutch shots, right, to have the narrative of the end of game hero, to the sneakers, to dunking, to the whole culture that we associate with basketball and NBA basketball today really is a byproduct of how MJ came and changed the league. And I think the documentary did a good job capturing how, especially when Michael first came in, it was like a cultural tour de force that really took the league by storm, right? From being fined for the shoes to, the bald head, a shooting guard leading his team, in an era of big men. So like the cultural impact, you could debate statistics, you could debate, this era versus that era, but what you can't debate is things that make Michael Jordan the GOAT off the court is just the cultural impact and the like I said, the tour de force, the lasting impression he had on the sport of basketball and the NBA as we know it today. And
for sure,
we're only here talking about this. Without Michael Jordan, we wouldn't be here talking about
100%, 100%. And I mean, the game wouldn't be as big overseas without Michael Jordan. Uh, this guy was a celebrity. This guy was an icon status, even outside of the States, just based off the Bulls. The Bulls were the team of the 90s. I had a Bulls jacket. I didn't even watch ball as much. I had a
Right,
Bulls jacket in the mid 90s
right,
because Michael Jordan was the culture. Michael Jordan was permeating through the 90s in many, many different ways. And it's kind of cool in the documentary or the docuseries how you see Jerry Seinfeld there and you see
yeah.
Leonardo
Leonardo
DiCaprio.
DiCaprio, right?
It's like the 90s are staring you right in the face, but Michael Jordan was like the epicenter
Yeah,
of cool in the 90s.
yeah.
Space Jam, everything that came along with that, like it just,
I want
his
to be
impact is
like
huge.
Mike, right? The Gatorade, and yeah,
Exactly, man. It's his impact is undeniable, and there's always been great players before him, but no one ever impacted the NBA growth the way Michael Jordan did.
right. And to that point, I think it's impossible. Like what I want listeners to or viewers to kind of consider, though, it's impossible for an athlete today, a celebrity today, a musician today, to really capture the global zeitgeist the way a Michael Jordan or the other MJ, Michael Jackson did, because there's just so much more noise, right? I mean, like you wouldn't have an amateur podcast, 30 years ago, much less all the other celebrities on social media and just YouTube and so many outlets that we have today, that it's harder for an individual cult of personality to really um, establish itself. Like it's the same reason why you'll never have another Michael Jackson. It's not that someone's not going to make music as quote unquote good as Michael
Yeah,
Jackson, but
that's very
it's
true.
impossible for one individual to become that kind of cult of personality and really, capture the world's ears or their eyes. Guys like Drake or the guys like LeBron James have done a good approximation. Cristiano Ronaldo have done good approximations, but it's just not the same that we live in. It's kind of the beautiful thing about the 90s as well, too. Sort of apex capitalism, right? Like where we lived in a time where the world was kind of good enough in the 80s and 90s where we could have these mythical figures and
That's the thing, man. It's innocence too. The '90s is just right now. You mentioned that it's hard to capture the hearts and minds of every single person in the world, and those that do, man. Like in today's world, that's crazy. But like, there's just so much negative news out there about people. Social media is rampant, so it's hard for people to get by without exposing their flaws in some way. So Michael Jordan, if social media was around when he was around, I mean, would we talk about him the same way? You know what I mean? It's the 90s were that perfect era where
where
guys
they're
like,
sort of insulated. The stars are insulated, right?
exactly.
And
Unless you
there's just not
really
so
dig
many of
deep.
them. Exactly, right? The Jordan rules. So that's actually a good kind of segue. What was, and I know so many people have talked about it to death, but what were some of the stories, or one of the stories maybe, that kind of stuck out to you as particularly interesting? And
In terms of stories, man, just obviously, I loved just hearing some of the confirmations of some of the stories, like his why he went at the Blazers with the 3-pointers like he did. Obviously, Clyde Drexler being touted as a better 3-point specialist, and him just saying, "Okay, cool," and just does but breaks at that time a 3-point record in the first half in the
first half,
playoffs.
6 threes, right?
Right? I mean, those are some of the things that speak to his character of just taking anything as a little slight, and just
Mm-hmm.
seeing that theme explored constantly. It's like, oh, so then, yeah, he looked at me funny, and that's why I ruined him. Or George Karl didn't say hi to me in an event. So it's like I have nothing personally against Sean Kemp or Gary Payton, but George Karl did this, so therefore I'm going to destroy his team. So seeing those little bits of pettiness were
Which made Michael, right?
exactly.
Love it or hate it, that's what made him Michael, right?
For sure. But I think my favorite part of the docuseries actually was the '92 Dream Team episode.
Oh, okay, with the scrimmage
Yeah, the scrimmage scrimmage footage.
video.
I want, like, I want all of that. Like, that is the most entertaining, like, 5 minutes I've watched. And I thought nothing in the documentary topped that, just because it was so awesome to see guys scrimmaging together, like Magic Johnson calling fouls on
Mm-hmm.
MJ,
Mm-hmm.
telling him that it's not the Chicago Stadium, and then 5 minutes later saying, "What are we in Chicago?" Uh, and then just talking about how the style of play in the '90s is soft, while Michael Jordan's like, "Yeah, this is
Welcome to the 90s, right?
yeah, exactly, right." So it's funny to see that constant cycle of my era is better than yours
Yeah,
in a scrimmage from the
right.
'90s.
No, definitely, and that definitely stood out to me as well too, as one of the kind of cool things with the documentary. For me, what I liked was, I find like, people our age especially were sort of around for the second three-peat.
Right.
The first three-peat was more, history. Um, Now, you could vouch for me that even before this documentary, before COVID and stuff, like for whatever reason, I was watching Mad MJ games
He was. That's true.
on YouTube.
And as a result, I was too, because I was being shared links every
That's how
day.
it goes. And a lot of that was from the first three-peat, and like, you touched on Portland. And we remember that Portland series, like they blew Portland out of the 6-game series, and you should watch Game 5. It's Jordan has 46 in it, and Jordan and Pippen, their defense is just, two alphas. It's amazing. But no, like I like the way we went through. I don't like how we did with the Pistons thing. I'll get to that in a second. But
Right.
I liked, the Lakers series, the Blazers series, the Suns series. I like how much, footage they got from Charles Barkley as well too.
For sure.
To be able to speak and just say, hey, it was the wrong time. Like Mike was better than me at the time. That's, if you guys, maybe the ship has sailed, but for whatever reason, if you're bored and you don't have enough content in this COVID world, or you're a nerd like me and you want to watch some basketball, games 5, 6, or games 4, 5, 6 of that Suns Bulls series.
Right.
It's high level basketball. Like,
it's a really good series, man.
Yeah, you watched some of it. You watched Game 4, right?
I watched Game 4. I watched 4 or 5, I believe.
One of those. They all blur into one, right? But like that's the Jordan you see, and you're like, would he dominate in today's league as well? Too? Because the way he dominates every possession, Pippen too. By the way, he does. I'll get to that. He does. I don't think he gets enough love in the doc, if I'm being honest. But
yeah, I mean that's something I think we both agree on. But yeah.
But yeah. The first three-peat. I loved how they ran through that. I love the music that they had with it. That kind of reflected the time as well too. Right. I think every song that they played during each of the finals was from that year, and the best they could do was they had it match the month as well too. So it really captures what it felt like in 91, 92, and 93.
Yeah, man, for sure. The music was exceptional. Not even just the hip hop tracks that they inserted, but even just the accompanying strings and the dramatic music. The editing was on point for this thing, and I love the way that they picked the theme from the last season and related it back to a theme from prior in his career or prior in the Bulls run.
Right.
Just exploring, like when they're talking about Dennis Rodman, they talked about Dennis Rodman on the Pistons, and then they brought it back to the Last Dance with him and with the Bulls.
Right.
So I just like the way they kind of kept doing that throughout the documentary. I mean, it did get a little bit muddled when they're talking about the Jazz 97, 98
because
series.
Now it's
like
realities meeting.
Yeah, and to be honest, I feel like I didn't learn enough about the Jazz as much in this one.
Yeah,
and that could be. Yeah, I mean that's another thing, but that's what made it harder to follow at the end. But I just loved in general, for the most part, the editing on this thing. It was amazing.
Yeah, and let's let's close off the praise, and then you get to 60. But the other guy I want to give kudos to right here, because you mentioned 97, 98, is Adam Silver, because Adam Silver is probably thanking his younger self because he was the head of NBA media in 98 when they made this deal, or 97 when they made this deal. And the idea was like, Mike, we won't release this footage unless we have your green light, etc. And like it came and saved his league during an unprecedented pandemic.
Yeah,
he's the commissioner, right? Like gotta think like Adam Silver, right?
That's actually a really crazy tidbit. Right? 22 years later.
Yeah. So look, we got out the hot air, all the rightfully good stuff about the doc. You touched on right there that you didn't learn enough about Utah. Like maybe you could kind of talk about it a little bit. Like what?
Well, I mean,
what kind of stood out to you as some points of criticism there?
Well, there's a thing, debate going around, and a famous documentarian, Ken Burns, criticized the Last Dance.
Ken Burns, who did like Vietnam War and
I know,
Civil War and
I'm not sure where our audience is the Venn diagram of our audience in like World War, Vietnam War, and everything. But Ken
the
Burns,
Michael Jordan long form documentaries, basically.
Yeah, basically the king of kings when it comes to documentaries, and essentially he was just saying that this isn't a documentary because it comes from a very biased perspective. It's produced by Jordan's company. Jordan has a huge hand in terms of what he's willing to talk about, and for the most part, I mean, it does work because he's fairly candid about most things.
But he's biased. Like any
give,
human being
give,
will be biased, right?
yeah, exactly. Everything would be biased. For me, I didn't see that as much of a criticism because I kind of knew what I was getting into.
Same, yeah.
You expected this to be just a glorified Jordan project. It was
A
nice.
celebration, as they said.
Exactly, a celebration rather than just
A microscope.
putting a microscope on him and just looking through every single bit of indignity in his career and kind of magnifying it for everyone. So it was good and it worked for what it was intended. Though I know some people were put off by the lack of objectivity when it came to certain things. I know in certain
Some
situations, and that was my segue. I know in certain situations you weren't as pleased with what the documentary showed. So tell the fine people.
Right, so I'll rapid fire over here. Let's go through the career, right?
All right.
Pre-championship Jordan. I get he's not a fan of Isaiah Thomas, and in fact, he probably doesn't actually drag the man's career. But again, like I said, a lot of people take Jordan's word to be gospel, and that's where it's kind of problematic. Because Isaiah Thomas is arguably the best point guard to ever play the game. Go watch a highlight reel of his on the YouTube. He's a point guard. We're talking about MJ, defying the odds of being a shooting guard, leading a team to championships in the early '90s. Isaiah Thomas beat Larry Bird in his prime. He beat Magic Johnson in his prime. He beat Michael Jordan in his prime. He beat Michael Jordan in his prime. Just because Jordan beat him after doesn't mean it wasn't in his prime before. Keep that in mind.
Yeah,
right?
no, fair enough.
He beat Michael Jordan in his prime. And he won 2 championships as a 6'1" point guard. Right? And as we talk about, as Jordan shows, he has different vendettas. You shared with me today a leak from the guy that wrote the Dream Team book. Jordan did leave Isaiah Thomas off of the Dream Team.
Yeah, he admitted it.
And you know what? Like, fine, that's what he does. But I don't like the cultural ramifications of what it's done to Isaiah's legacy. Because again, the way we talk about the single thread that connects Jordan's cultural impact to everything we see in the NBA today, we live in a point guard dominated league, right? And whether we know it or not, a lot of that style of play comes from Isaiah Thomas. That's first.
For sure.
Then we go to 92 and we kind of, I think, Clyde Drexler, how they paint him, it's fine. I think it's kind of important to remember that that's a pre-league pass, pre-globalization type of league. So Portland games might not be on NBC or CBS, so people kind of just know him as a Pacific Northwest Michael Jordan. He was in the Phi Slamma Jamma in Houston. So you can see why people would compare him, but fine, I understand why MJ would take that as a slight. And, Clyde Drexler, great player too, but you're right. Jordan did shatter his dreams, and his career kind of was never the same since.
I thought they gave Clyde pretty fair coverage, I guess, in the documentary.
Yeah, fair enough. Barkley, I think he got great coverage, right? Because I guess they're
contemporaries, man. They're friends. It's just
they're friends. But there's something I heard that Mike doesn't talk to Charles anymore because Charles had
Charles commented. He said
on
that
his management style.
Yeah, he was commenting on that, saying that Michael Jordan surrounds himself with a lot of yes men, and that's why he hasn't exceeded as an executive to the level that anyone else has. We have 2 decades worth of this stuff now to measure him on.
If Michael Jordan is the Michael Jordan of basketball, he's the Harold Miner of executives, right? So,
oh shit! Okay, that's a reference.
There's nothing there. Then we go 94, 95. Scottie Pippen. I don't like how they treated Scottie Pippen. You talk about this, how, like, I'll let you get into it about, okay, Mo, what do you think about, Tim Grover trying to say that Michael Jordan could have been the MLB? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think one of my biggest issues with the docuseries, you'll see moments of this, is where they lean too much into the myth a bit of who Jordan is. It's like, he was batting 200 in the minors, so that's pretty good. I'm like, no, but he's like 33, so like, his longevity and his prospects in the MLB were not going to be good, regardless how you paint it or portray it. I don't care if it's a docuseries 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not lie. It's like a lot of the media stuff that's coming out now saying LeBron could play the NFL.
Yeah,
this is not how it works. You can't just pick up the sport 15 years after you first played it and now suddenly become so dominant at it that you're better than the guys that are
best at it. Right. I think the LeBron stuff, a lot of it's a response because it's like, now, okay,
it is very
the Jordan hype machine is baseball, then the LeBron hype machine has to come back and say he could have played football, which is a tougher sport. And
yeah.
defend the baseball fans.
And then
Uh,
also Scottie
yep.
Pippen. And I mean, I'll let you expand a little bit
No,
further,
go
but
ahead.
I just felt like it was, setting him up for redemption arcs twice during the documentary, where I think felt like it was a bit unfair on him. Like, oh, he had the migraine, and I felt like there was a bit of tone change in the sense of like they're kind of perceiving him as weak for not willing to continue on. Um,
Yes,
and
I
then
got a
having
lot of that too.
the redemption against the Pistons for not responding after being knocked down. And then, obviously we had the situation where he asked for not to be put back in the game with the when he was
Tony
by
Kukoc.
himself on the
Yeah,
Bulls
yeah.
for Tony Kukic's shot, setting him up for another redemption where, then also the contract issues, but then setting him up for another redemption by playing hurt during the 98 finals. But I
Right.
just felt like it was just a reproving of like,
The Scotty's tough,
Scottie
right?
Pippen I felt like they're just painting him more as an emotional liability
Yeah.
that needed to be reined in by Jordan, but he was also someone on his own right that was good. He was a top 10 player.
Top five players. This is what I'm saying. Like it's
It's
kind of
a
ridiculous.
better Jimmy Butler, who's regarded as a top 12 player.
He's honestly okay. A couple of things with that. I think episode 2 with Scottie Pippen, they give him his due over there, and it was promising in the documentary. And Michael had the line where he said that there is no Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen,
Right.
and I think that episode paints Scottie in a good light. But then you're right. We have things like the migraine. We have 20 minutes dedicated in a Michael Jordan documentary about a Bulls season where Michael Jordan wasn't there, and it's following Scottie Pippen's the biggest black mark on his career.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there 20 minutes on that? And then we have Scottie Pippen's back issues in Game 6 against Utah. When we forget that Scottie Pippen was an apex player as well too, and Scottie Pippen was a top 5 player in the NBA during his career. And you just said a better Jimmy Butler. When guys like T-Mac were coming in, they compared him to Scottie Pippen. When Kawhi Leonard was on his rise, they compared him to Scottie Pippen. Kevin Durant, they compared to Scottie Pippen. He was, we talk about LeBron's declining defense. Jordan didn't usually guard the best player on the other team. He guarded the second best player. Scottie Pippen did, right? Mm-hmm. And go watch these games. Scottie Pippen, like, let's take the entirety of his career arc. He was one of the coolest players in the league. He's like another Jordan. Obviously, he's not Jordan, but he was kind of like Jordan light, right? And to reduce him to these, and apparently Pippen's not happy about this either, right? How he's been painted, right? But like, we know this. We're older guys, you know this. If I'm 17 years old and I'm watching Scottie Pippen, I'm thinking he's like the Draymond Green here on the Warriors team.
He's just an emotional liability that Jordan had to carry along with him.
But they're not showing how good he is, though. Like,
I know, and that's the thing.
In 97, 98, these playoffs, like, Jordan scoring 28 points against Gary Payton. Like, Scottie Pippen was a big part of these 96 playoffs, the 97 playoffs, the 98 playoffs.
Who's leading the Bulls in rebounds, assists, steals,
well, rebounds, Dennis Rodman. But before that,
before that, and then going into the second three-peat, he's leading in rebounds. In assists, steals. Defensive player, like top defense. Did he win Defensive Player of the Year during those years? But he was up there for consideration, right?
But he's definitely remembered as maybe the best perimeter defender in the league. When we watch Kawhi Leonard on defense, like, we see shades of Scottie Pippen, right? And I don't think that was fair at all. But again, it seems that we pick and choose. Like, we had all this time with Dennis Rodman, but then Horace Grant was just as integral to the first three-peat, and he actually scored as well too. Like, he had a few less rebounds a game, but he scored at a much higher clip than Dennis Rodman. But for whatever reasons, Horace Grant is kind of a footnote. We have a big story on Steve Kerr because he's the coach of a very popular team now. And I'm not hating on that, but like, really, Tony Kukoc is probably a bigger part of that second three-peat in terms of contribution.
But that's where the objectivity of the docuseries comes into play. Is it worth covering someone like Steve Kerr, who might be more notable to fans now than Tony Kukoc, who is just basically known through 2K circles into his home country?
Yeah, right. I think Phil Jackson probably should have got a little bit more airtime.
100%. I thought
that was a really interesting story.
Yeah, for sure. He actually had
burned sage and
just thinking that he was a lion after taking acid. That was interesting. I want to hear more about that story. But like, they only spent what I felt like was 20 minutes on Phil Jackson, despite
as
having
a focus.
as a focus, but spent most of an episode on Dennis Rodman, who I think, in my opinion, obviously a great, tremendous player. Whenever we play pickup games, I always try to be like Dennis Rodman in the sense of just energy and try to do. Yeah, exactly. And I hair dyeing. But in terms of, his story and whatnot, I think especially by the time he got to the Bulls, a lot of it was just done for attention. A lot of it wasn't really captivating in a sense. And also from a biased perspective, I did watch a Dennis Rodman documentary, but maybe about a month before this.
It was about an hour and 20 minutes too long, right?
So, and I was just tired. I was just tired of the story. So maybe that was just my bias coming into it, but I just didn't find that episode as fascinating than anything about Phil Jackson, who I think is infinitely more fascinating than Dennis Rodman.
Yeah. What was cool with the Dennis Rodman footage, though, in that Game 6, I think you told me this, the Game 6,
right.
There's a tussle or scuffle with Karl Malone, but apparently that was orchestrated by the WCW because they had the feud going on.
Eric Bischoff confirmed that, actually. He told Rodman to just, get a little physical with Malone. And I guess that's the result of what you just saw.
Because I think I remember, like, me and my sister were watching back then, like, she didn't watch wrestling, but like, how are these guys in this fake sport together when they really don't like each other in real life, right? Like, how could they cooperate? I had no answer. I was like, I don't know.
Because they really seem right?
They really seem not to like one another, right? So
that
was cool. And then the second repeat, like, okay, I get it. You dismiss Gary Payton as a defender and stuff, but like, fine. Like, I guess they show both sides of it, and you could choose what to believe. But shout out to the Sonics. And there's like no mention of Sean Kemp. Like, it was kind of weird, like how Sean Kemp was the best player on the Sonics that playoff run and that finals, but he's not mentioned. And then Reggie Miller, he gets his fair due. Like, I thought they did a great job with Reggie.
They did, for sure.
In the conference finals in '98, so it's kind of weird, like, which opponents they pick and choose to highlight and focus, and maybe Reggie because he's available, or the trash talking, or like I love that they showed Reggie that way because I think Reggie's legacy. You mentioned that maybe this is because he's not in NBA 2K, but his legacy is it's a little bit.
It's different.
Like, we look at things in an analytics world, and I was talking about the Bill Simmons and discussion about Kobe and TD as well too. Like, sometimes, like, because we live in the era of pure analytics, that we apply that lens when looking back, and it's like,
yeah, you can.
Oh, he's just a 20-point a game scorer. Didn't really do much to have. But when you're there in the late 90s, even the early 2000s, when they're making the finals, like, you knew Reggie Miller was just such an iconic player, right? And
for sure. I mean, highly regarded now in the sense of someone ahead of his time, given with the way the league has gone and how
three-point shooting, right?
And how good he was on such little volume at the three-point shot. Still be regarded as one of the best shooters ever, like top 3. With that
Don't
little
you think
volume,
some of that's just in the Book of Basketball podcast when they had the Reggie episode? Like, I don't feel like people really talk about Reggie that way. Like, when we talk about three-point shooters, we think Ray Allen and Steph Curry. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
well, I mean, you'll see his name at the top, but like, I guess in terms of the basketball circles and what I listen to, I always feel like I'm in that in that universe, right? That echo chamber. But I mean, I hope that he's regarded with somewhat of a respectful career by people who don't necessarily aren't in that chamber. But I feel like he is. Do you hear different? Do you not hear different?
This is the most unempirical thing. I just don't feel like Reggie's kind of considered, because it's the same thing. Like, we're listening to just to get the listeners or viewers up to speed with to the Bill Simmons podcast of Ryan Rosilio, and they're kind of talking about like Tim Duncan versus Kobe, and I get, like, guys like Duncan shine better with time because numbers and his team was always winning and it's efficient, and he had 5 championships, and like, it's not me dissing Duncan, like, that's all that is true, but then, like, to say he's better than Kobe Bryant, it's like, yeah, you're right about all those facts, but there's something about being in the moment and like the reality of the time, right? And that's one thing I thought this documentary did a good job with Reggie Miller, is that I don't think Reggie's 18, 19 points a game and 5 All-Star appearances or whatever, and like however many All-NBA teams, they don't create this wicked resume
for sure
of a player that was just so representative of his time. But he really was more than just that, and I think the Last Dance does an exceptional job capturing kind of who Reggie was
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of positives to take away from it, but if there's one positive to take away from it is that, some legends did get their due, in terms of kind of shining a light on their careers to a newer audience. And, hopefully there's due diligence on other people's part to watch more of it and to explore
Hope
some of
away, my
that.
friend. Hope away, my friend.
Well, it's
They
cool.
barely do that about a COVID. You think they're going to do it about?
We said the dreaded C word, COVID, on this podcast. We're just alluding to it, of the pandemic.
Okay.
But I had a question for you, actually, and it's
Yeah.
about another person that's been, I guess, fairly unfairly criticized. I just want to get your take, Jerry Krause.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
Because I get that, for the narrative purposes, you need that villain and that you need something to rally against. And obviously Mike and Pippen had issues with him throughout the 90s, but do you feel like he was as fairly treated as he should have been? Also, given that he really can't even speak for himself.
Yeah. So that's the one thing. He can't speak for himself, because God rest his soul. He's passed away. I think it's about a year ago. So I kind of have two thoughts on that. Like, one, I think on some level, the producers of the documentary did a decent job of leaving Michael and Scotty's sentiment to Krause open to interpretation, right?
And how so?
Because they're showing footage of Michael and Scotty, saying very mean things about the guy's height and weight, and things that I thought we don't accept in society, right? But they're not reinforcing and saying that that's a good thing that he's doing.
Fair enough.
These viewers are the ones that have already myth-maked Michael, and then they can't separate basketball god from their normal values, right? So that all of a sudden these things that any other facet of life we would not approve of gets a pass, right? Then on the other side, we are seeing that they're showing that Jerry Krause went and found someone like Scottie Pippen from an unheralded college and traded up to get him. They are technically showing that he had this affinity for a European shooting stretch four that people weren't really looking for in Tony Kukoc. But then people interpret it and say, well, Michael didn't like him, so these things are bad things, right? So maybe the documentary could have done a better job of like contextualizing and crystallizing the value of, like, because as you can tell by how I'm speaking, like, while I do hold Krause morally responsible for not letting the three-peat championship team continue, I don't necessarily criticize him as a general manager strategist, because like I said, like he drafted Michael Jordan, which might have been a no-brainer in some regard, but again, he drafted Michael Jordan. He drafted Scottie Pippen. He went looking for Tony Kukoc. When they got defeated by the Orlando Magic, shout out, in the 95 playoffs after Jordan's comeback, well, they realized, they didn't have the size to go against guys like Horace Grant, and he went and got Dennis Rodman, right? Yeah. He got guys like Steve Kerr. So he did things that like we normally credit executives and general managers for in today's league, but yeah, maybe the documentary could have highlighted that more, and it definitely could have. But some of it's just like, man, like it's you guys. You guys are the ones that are just taking things and throwing your moral compass all in disarray because Michael Jordan's really good at basketball, which is you problem, man. That's
yeah. I mean, he also hired Tex Winter, who I guess didn't even get really much of a reference.
Right. Tex Winter, Phil Jackson, Mickey. Exactly. Sorry, you're right, man. Yeah.
The greatest coaching staff ever assembled, essentially, to also coach one of the best put together teams ever assembled. I mean, there's a reason we call the 95-96 Bulls one of the greatest teams. It was a well put together team outside of Michael Jordan too, right? And
guys, like, keep in mind, we've seen Mike is not a good executive. So when he says everybody would have come back on 1 year deals, does he realize the other players want to get long-term contracts? Like as they get older,
Scottie Pippen was not coming back for another year.
He got his nice payday in Houston, right? So, and he mentioned maybe not Scottie, but like all these other guys also have, like, they're not just living life to orbit around your son, right? Like,
exactly.
So, like, obviously they're going to secure. Steve Kerr won another championship in '99 with San Antonio, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So those are some of, you're right. I like that Jerry Krause question. It's maybe unpopular because it's easy to vilify because, again, gone back all of the stuff that we've done about like anti-fat shaming, anti-this shaming, and now
You
we've
can't
gone
just
back
say
to
it's
bully
okay
culture,
now. Yeah,
right?
and I
Like,
mean, also another thing about Crows too is that um, basically, wow, I just lost my train of thought. Okay.
basically, they made his primary flaw was that he was physically unattractive. Is how he presented his documentary, like,
Yeah.
which is like it's mind-bogglingly ridiculous, and yeah, a lot of people eat it up, man. A lot of
Yeah.
people eat it up, man.
No, it's unfortunate too, and also yeah. Now I remember the point. Is another thing to his credit too is that Jordan retired with little notice,
Oh
and
yeah,
he's
like,
and
like
he was
what,
still
2 weeks
able
before
to
training camp?
take that team without a proper offseason of retooling and replacing the best player in the whole league, and essentially getting them to the Eastern playoffs, the second round, 7 games.
Yeah.
Um, that's a great accomplishment in a time where your best player retires literally like a few weeks
Imagine
before the
LeBron
season.
told the Lakers that, or Giannis told the Bucks he's not going to come back 2 weeks before training camp, right?
Yeah. And
So
I think Jerry Reinsdorf pushed a lot of the flack toward Krause, and I think he's actually just as more culpable for not being the one to, I guess,
bring the team back or whatever.
step in and say, hey, no, this isn't their last year. This is my
Yeah, and
team.
it's stupid. Like, obviously, I'm not discounting all the stuff that's blatantly stupid. Like, that I don't care if you go 72-0 or you're not.
100%.
Or
Yeah.
like that.
He's not
That
without
stuff is
fault.
unacceptable, right? So
He's not without fault, and I think that the documentary paints that perfectly. But I do think there's a lot that needs to be credited toward him, that they didn't touch upon as much. And I almost feel, and I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but with episode 9 and 10 being done in production as these are airing, I feel maybe they saw some of the backlash toward Krause, because I mean they made a point to say, have Scottie Pippen say he's the greatest GM.
yeah,
So maybe they could have cut that in, and put that in episode 10 as a result of that, as
that's
some
true.
of the
Real time.
backlash, right? So 9 and 10, I feel like 10 in particular went a little lighter on Krause,
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
than the
That's fair.
previous episodes. And I feel
That's
like
fair.
there might have been some impact from the prior reviews where they're like, oh, like we can't have this guy totally skewered on air. It's not
Skewered.
fair to him. Yeah.
That's
Skewered.
no, that's actually a very good observation, right? Because I guess they have the benefit of almost like agile production that they see the feedback and then
Yeah,
close the
exactly.
loop on that. But yeah, look, overall, that's what we do sports for, to have these conversations, etc. Right? So the documentary delivered in that regard, right? So yeah, it was a lot of fun, right? It
I
was
loved it.
fun. It brought the Jordan culture back into people's minds, and
And I just loved how it brought back old debates, even between the older players, back to the
yeah,
limelight. Like you have a lot of these older vets kind of going at each other through radio, even Horace Grant just recently. But like it's just funny to see all the stuff that's from
repercolate,
back in the
right?
day just repercolate just because of this documentary.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, obviously, we can go into Horace Grant's criticisms or whatnot if you want to. I mean, I
I
think
disagree. Yeah, I mean, I
we've
think
echoed a
what
lot of
Horace
what
is
he
saying
said
too.
before,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
yeah,
So I guess we time warp back then today, because here in late May 2020, there seems to be a lot of momentum now picking up for an NBA return,
finally.
um, and a bunch of different formats, etc. So yeah, fine. I guess that's. I was gonna say, how do you?
I'm excited, man.
What's the monologue on that? Go ahead.
Listen, we can talk about the legalities. We can talk about what's morally right and whatnot. And I get it. 100% I get it. This is like such an unprecedented time. Selfishly, I just love sports being back. And if they can figure out a way to do it safely, great. Um, so that's my perspective on it. Obviously, there's a larger conversation to be had, but from the sports podcaster perspective, as someone who's a fan of the NBA, obviously I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't excited to watch 9 hours of basketball straight, because apparently they're supposed to be airing it during the day.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
even know that. Sick, man.
that's one of the things being talked about. Is that, well, if they air it, they have so many games to play potentially that they might just play it throughout the day.
Yeah, because everyone's work schedule and stuff is all in disarray anyway. So
Yeah, exactly. But I'm excited, man. Like, what are some of your thoughts on some of the plans that you've heard about? Like, I mean, talk about some of the things that you've liked, some of the things that you don't like necessarily.
well, let me ask you before that. Like,
Okay.
obviously, like, no one's living under a rock, but if if and when this plan goes live, it's going to be completely without fans. It's going to be the contained. Disney Orlando environment. So there's a lot of
You
Orlando.
bought that shirt, you got to flaunt it, man. I get it.
The whole thing, all the reason I'm wearing Orlando is because I thought this shirt over here catches the apex between 90s basketball, topic one, and
That's actually
basketball in Orlando, right? So
I have a Raptor shirt on because this captures the champions, and I got the ring behind me.
Also, I'm gonna go one level deeper because in the metaphor, in Game of Zones, the neutral location for the battle was in Seattle, right? So
oh shit, okay.
You have the NBA champ, you have Michael Jordan the GOAT, you have Raptors current champion. I have a ring over here as well. You have the rings, and I'm trying to just represent these scenarios. These what would happen if the Dream Team played against today's Dream Team? It'll happen in Seattle. If you don't watch Game of Zones, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, actually, I think if anyone should take anything away from this is just watch Game of Zones because it is great. It's great.
You should watch that instead of listening to this. Like, it's
well, what the hell are you talking about, man? Watch it after this.
If you make like a playlist, this, then you would
make a playlist with this podcast first, and then put the Game of Zones season, whatever. Episode 1 to 4, episode 1 to 5, whatever. Just put that right after the podcast if that works for you.
All right. Anyway, so I was saying, it's going to take place in a Disney sports complex, and it's a fully quarantined affair, which in itself is like something. What do you think of no fans, though?
I'm excited. Honestly,
no fans?
I'm excited in the sense I just think we're going to get a lot of trash talk.
Yeah, you're going to have to do a 1 minute delay for all that.
They might do a 1 minute delay, I get it, but there's going to be some stuff that just makes it to air where it's just hilarious. And I mean, it's just going to be interesting. It's going to be unique. I have always gravitated toward the on-court experience, and obviously fans change the game and change the momentum and whatnot. I'm just excited to see the product. I'm sure after like 4 or 5 games of the initial shock, I'll be like, okay, I need some crowd audience, and I need that noise. And then obviously
momentum, like someone
that's the thing. Playoffs is going to be the momentum is going to be.
LeBron does a dunk on a comeback, or when we watched when the Raptors came back from down 30 against the Mavs, like an empty arena. But let me ask you, I tried watching like WrestleMania without sound or without the crowd.
Yeah.
And candidly, I thought it was atrocious. Right? Like it doesn't come off well. And maybe wrestling is different where the crowd is more.
It's like you're watching.
What have you thought about wrestling without fans?
Well, wrestling without the fans has been definitely interesting. I think they've kindly found their groove in terms of how they present the show. But also as a note, and it's funny that we talk about this today because WWE just instituted. Basically, they have a lot of their developmental talent. They're screened beforehand, but they have about 10 to 15 of them around the ring. In the audience with a plexiglass in front of them.
They started doing this recently?
They started doing this yesterday on Raw.
Just to create like a crowd atmosphere?
Just to create an atmosphere, and it's night and day, man. Like AEW's been doing that too since the pandemic.
Behind the plexiglass too, or
not behind the plexiglass, but they have it outdoors, and so their guys are separated in the crowd. But just even having anyone around making noise.
And you said how many superstars, sir?
We're looking at about 10 to 15 to 20, actually.
Okay, and it makes a difference, huh?
It makes a difference because you can hear people. And people.
But are they cheering like fans? Like what character are they playing?
They're cheering as fans, as bipartisan fans. Actually, not partisan because they're cheering the face and heel dynamics.
Okay, so there is that. Okay, so
there is
character.
There is that, but then just to even hear anyone. It's just such a different. It's like finally there's something in the background.
Yeah.
It's like I mentioned. I feel like it was theater almost without fans.
Like it's hard on the wrestlers too because they have to communicate with each other.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's the matter of like choreographing this whole thing, right? That sometimes there's no whispers to one another in this capacity.
But conversely, MMA's gone no fans too, and they've made that transition very well because
people love that, right? But I don't know,
like basketball.
Fighting's a little bit different, right? But basketball, it'll be cool. Like obviously, I get it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it because it's no fans, but I mean, some people are. Some people think that, I think it's a minority opinion that if there's no fans, there's no point. But initially, LeBron, that was before we knew the gravity of COVID-19.
Oh yeah, I remember that. And I mean,
LeBron had dismissed the idea of not playing with fans. But again, like obviously. It's such a rapidly changing situation that
for sure, and there's a lot of money at stake.
To say then that that's the other thing. It's a lot of money at stake, and that's why we're
not just to the national broadcasters, but to all these local broadcasters. There's contracts owed, and that's why you're seeing just a big push too for a lot of these teams to want to get back. They want that money, and they want to be able to. The players need to get paid too, and I mean playoffs are a bonus. So to see some sort of regular season reappear in some way, that'll only put some more money in the pockets of the players.
And everyone around that tour player is media. Like
yeah, exactly. It's a huge revelation,
right?
Exactly.
So there's been a few different kind of proposals or
I know you're a fan
creative
of
ideas.
I know you're a fan of one of them.
I was gonna ask you, me? I was gonna ask you, like, you're the expert. There's a few different options out there. What do you think about some of them? I can speak about what I like as well too, but however you want to do this, we're clearly doing this real time, guys.
Yeah, no, for the options out there right now, I mean, there's been talk about the group stage, like soccer. That's definitely an option that's being considered. But to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I would try to
conference executives.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I'm a Raptors fan. I just feel like we're going to get screwed into this somehow, some way. But yeah, my years of fanhood have just kind of conditioned me to expect the worst when it comes to our franchise's peak, even with the ring right behind me. But the thing is, like, I just feel like as much as we are in such a dynamic situation that is so different from anything we've experienced, I think for the sanctity of the playoffs itself, you try to keep that as normal as you can. In the sense of how you progress in the playoffs. I think, there's talk about the group stage where you'd be playing a common group once or twice each, and then the best two people from that group would move on to the second round of the playoffs. I'm not the biggest fan of that just because I just feel like it just changes the method, the means of how you got there or why you got to where you did. Obviously, home court doesn't matter anymore. So that's one factor.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point, right?
But also, you're expecting.
The Clippers are the biggest winners, then, right?
Yeah, but you're expecting a certain matchup style. You're not expecting to just kind of, suddenly the Spurs and this team's in my group. Oh wow, I didn't expect that. I was just expecting to play Orlando in the first round. You know what I mean? So like, I just feel like you need to keep it as normal as possible where you can. In such a wildly chaotic world that we're living in, just try to keep it as constant.
So, what do you prefer, that we jump straight into the playoffs, or how do you envision that?
I like the hybrid. I like the play-in because I do think that adds a touch of what the league's been wanting to try out. But at the same time,
so can you explain maybe what you mean by the play-in over here? And it doesn't have to be in full detail, but
yeah, for sure. The play-in essentially would take the 7, 8 seeds from each conference, and they'd put them up between the 4 teams below it, I believe, with the 7, 8, and then you have the 9 and the 10, the 9 and 10. Okay. And then those teams will be combating for those final 2 spots, I believe.
In meantime, then the top 6 teams would, I guess, play exhibition games to tune up?
Yeah, I guess I mean, for me, I would think it would make sense for them just to play interconference games just so you're not kind of tipping your hand. But even if we do the whole 1-16 dependent.
Right. That's another option too, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but, they're talking about seeding the playoffs irrespective of conference 1-16 straight. You could still do in a theoretical play-in model for that. Because there were a couple of teams in the West that were on the bubble. New Orleans, Portland, Phoenix was just on the outside, the San Antonio. And there was enough games between them and enough games left where you could have seen the playoffs get affected. And I think those teams should definitely have some sort of say in this matter.
So what I like about
you're a fan of the group stage, right?
Right. What they're sort of calling the World Cup model. And what that would have, in essence, is we would bring in the top 20 teams, right. Another 10, because there's also a matter of like just logistically. That's and your preferred proposal also takes this into account that if we're kind of gluing in X amount of individuals, probably it's better to limit that number rather than have like the Hornets or I guess Hornets would be on your thing. The Warriors or whoever's at the bottom over there. The Knicks coming in unnecessarily to go through the motions, and us just the science of it risking if we're to play out the season. But it seems like that's off the plate anyway. But the 20 team thing, like the league's already just, it feels like years ago, but it's just months ago. We're talking about potential play-in turn or mid-season tournaments.
Yeah, that's a
You talk
different
about
world.
right. You talk about 1-16. Obviously, that's an idea that's been tossed around, but a lot of people close to the matter for over the past decade now, and obviously it's unrealistic. It's unrealistic for a number of reasons, but primarily because getting 2/3 of owners to agree to that's
Yeah,
not likely to happen,
it's tough
and
ask.
it's obviously other logistics, etc. But I think the biggest thing I like about the World Cup model and essentially how that works is that we rank off the teams into 4 tiers, I believe, maybe 4 tiers. So tier 1 is like Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, Raptors. Tier 2 is Celtics, Nuggets. You go through the league that way, and then you distribute where they're looking at either doing a draw or another where tier 1 teams like Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, and Raptors get to pick who's in their groups, like sort of like kind of like the way gym class picking style.
Yeah.
So that's one of the way the groups would be determined, and then the groups would play 8 total matches, I believe, within the group, kind of like the way it works in soccer.
So they're playing each team twice then? Is that how it goes?
Yeah, they play each team twice, I believe, yeah. And then from there, 2 teams advance from that round robin group stage into the second round of playoffs. And like one thing I think is cool is that it's not excluding anyone from the playoffs, because that 20-team group stages, that is the playoffs as well, too, the way World Cup is, right? So you got all these exciting matchups and a different format that kind of, so if you think about the World Cup, like, you get to see maybe the Celtics and Nets twice, like whatever it may be, right? Just different permutations. Every game sort of matters. So it's not like playing out the regular season traditionally, where it's like, well, it doesn't really matter for this team. Every game matters, but in a different way than it would in the best of 7 series. And I think
right.
It's different, and it's kind of cool. And then I think that's a good way to kind of capture an audience as well, too, because I think one of the biggest challenges and the biggest risks and the biggest downfall, unfortunately, of this coming back to work program is the asterisk or the asterisk that'll be beside the eventual champion. But I think that this format is different enough and self-contained enough that it itself could become its own phenomena, right? And with people's betting and et cetera, like where it takes that World Cup type of feel, and it becomes a standalone tournament in some regards, like almost like the COVID championship, like not the championship during the time of COVID, right? That because it becomes its own enigma, it's not mimicking the playoffs of yesteryear or the playoffs of tomorrow, but it's its own thing of like, at that time we came back to working with this unique tournament where it's kind of based on what we did in the regular season, because there is still benefit of being good in the regular season over here. And we do this unique format where we see a bunch of different permutations and matchups, and then we have 4 best of 7 series. Like, to me, it accomplishes 2 things. It's the novelty of it, I think, actually increases the value of the eventual champion. And number 2, I think it's also just a good time to, we're never going to be, like, we saw the resistance towards the mid-season tournament. And I'm traditionally a traditionalist as well, too. Right? I like the old way. I don't believe in destroying conferences, but I think in this system, it allows us to try some new things as we move into the future. I'm not saying that we have to do this going forward, but it'll make this unique in its own right and allows us to test that innovation as well. So that's sort of why, I'm kind of on board for it.
I'm intrigued by the execution of it, and I do think it has legs as a potential solution. For me, it's just more about implementing it now, and I get it because their hands are tied when it comes to this stuff, and in terms of getting, in my opinion, I think it's just smarter to go with the least teams as you can.
Yep.
Not bring back all 30 teams.
So we're both on the same page there then.
Yeah, like it's just the less tests, less of a black eye to the league in terms of the test consumption. A lot of this stuff is for optics too, right? Because the NBA has no issues getting these tests. It's just whether, people are going to look at them fondly for taking these tests.
Come on, I'm a civilian, you're a civilian. We all want sports back.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That's what goes into it, right? And I do like the fact that the NBA is probably one of the more forward-thinking leagues in terms of always willing to look at how to reinvent the way they do things. Yeah. Even the hoopla over the All-Star game ended up becoming.
Oh yeah, the Elam ending, right?
Yeah, exactly. It became one of the best All-Star games in year ever.
Yeah,
Like,
in recent memory. Yeah,
like
yeah.
20 years, man.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like,
Beyond recent memory, yeah.
yeah. So like,
Yeah, no, you're right.
so I
Even the
think,
NBA is forward thinking enough that they're kind of the ones that started the COVID shutdown in North
yeah,
America.
like
Right?
they,
Like it's
it wasn't until they
right,
shut it down
right,
that
that
the
the
world
world
took it
kind of
seriously.
so
Because at that, and it's just funny because the NHL took about a day and a half later to cancel theirs. It's like the NBA made that move like 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and it kind of just shut down the world.
So I'm just bringing up this over here of what those possible group stages look like to kind of illustrate. Can you see my screen here?
I thought for a second that the podcast shut down, and that I was like, oh my god, did it record everything? All right, good, we're good to go.
I'm trying to see what I learned at work over here, but
I can see the stage.
yeah. So basically, the possible group stage draw. If we're talking about tiers 1 through 5, okay, this is what potential groups might look like, right? So you're looking Bucks, Jazz, Sixers, Grizzlies, Blazers. All of the permutations over here would make interesting basketball throughout the day. Like, so you're seeing a lot of this through the day. So I love to watch a Grizzlies versus Sixers game at 2 p.m. Lakers, Heat, Rockets, Magic, Pelicans. Again, the same kind of idea over there. Maybe Magic, fine, but like you have to include them. But like, right, like
but
Pelicans versus Rockets.
But you as a Raptors fan, and I'm talking, speak as subjectively as you can.
Yeah.
I know obviously we always have our objective hats on, with you with your Seattle Supersonics hat and me with no hat on. But as subjectively as a Raptors fan, would you be comfortable with that group, given that the Maverick have given us issues? Thunder is a formidable team. Spurs are never an easy out. And then to only take two teams from that group, you wouldn't feel at least a little bit nervous about that?
Yeah. So like, is it?
I'd feel nervous.
Like,
I feel.
Is it? Yeah. No. Is it better that we just go and start the playoffs and play Kyrie Irving or Spencer Dinwiddie in the New York or the Brooklyn Nets? Yeah, that's definitely the easier path. And on that, I agree with you that, speaking subjectively, but like I also know that if we go through a traditional way and the Raps win, like we're having if everyone has asterisks beside their championship, ours like 3, right? Whereas I think this model, it people show their mettle, right? Like because everyone is watching. Like, for casual fans, they forgot what happened in the regular season. They forgot who earned what standing what. But over here, almost regaining. Like I get what you're saying, right? But this
so you really feel like there's going to be an asterisk around any winner of this thing. Then I mean, isn't it everyone on the same playing ground? Then we're on the same.
Yeah, but people are stupid though, right? Like.
Yeah, but I mean, we can't worry about what people think.
But that's what makes it, right? When Phil Jackson put an asterisk behind the '99 Spurs championship, which never.
That's not regarded as a historical asterisk, though.
Is it not? Like, I didn't think it was, but now I'm hearing all, especially with the Jordan stuff. Now, what if he played '99? Well, that was asterisks anyway. Like, what?
No, because that's bullshit. It only serves to cater to what they believe in. At the end of the day, they're a champion. Tim Duncan won 5 rings. He won it in his second year, and that's what happens. It doesn't matter.
I hear some pundits say 4.5 or something, right?
Well, then LeBron only has 2 rings because he won in a lockout year too.
Yeah, but it was a different lockout.
No, come on. Yeah, but still, it's
no. I'm saying, but I agree. Like, I thought the '99 Spurs were like a remarkable team. Maybe I was young and I was stupid. I didn't realize like there's a benefit of young players over old players in this kind of condensed season. But I remember this series against Portland. I believe New York. LA as well too, and New York. Like I rate that team. I get it, but unfortunately, look, if LeBron wins in this model, not this model, in the normal model, I think haters are gonna put asterisks. If the Rockets win. Like I agree. People need to realize the reality of this.
Honestly,
right?
I would find more reason to hate on LeBron for not winning in this model than I guess. They're always going to find a way to hate.
Right. I just think that this group stage thing will almost like a static charge generate enough interest and teach the casual fans about these teams that by the time we get to round 2, there's meaning behind it. And like let's be real. Like how much do we watch global soccer? Not really. But by the time we get to the elimination round, we've learned enough in the group stages that we have, Germany versus whomever, right? Like we have a feeling around it because we've kind of seen
the narrative, the story. We've seen it all build up. I get it. But like.
But I get what you're saying. Yeah, like is it the easier path to the Raptors? Is playing the Nets in the first round.
It's not even the Raptors. It's just like.
You asked me with a subjective hat on, right?
Subjective hat on, yeah. It's a tough
you're right. It is, but like fuck,
like honestly, I look at that group. I'm like, I think Dallas and Boston might advance. I really think the Raptors might not see the light of day in that one, just because it's a tough group. Because Celtics are getting one of the group spots automatically.
Wow, you're seeing the Celtics more of a sure bet than us, huh?
I
I
just feel
guess.
like I don't know what this time off has done for Marc Gasol.
Yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. Is it good or bad, right, Mark?
Like
It'll be interesting, man.
Jason Tatum's a young guy. It's a little bit easier for him to get back into the swing of
but
things.
then on the other side, like you see, like Kyle Lowry starts seasons with hot, right? Like
that
and
is
he
true.
tapers down, right? Because the wear and tear, right? And Marc Gasol with rest and Serge Ibaka with rest. Like as an aging team, maybe it's. But again, like who knows like, what kind of shape people have been keeping him, what kind of diets they've been following,
and
right?
that's why I think you need to have some semblance of games before any sort of playoffs. And I say that not only just from from a health perspective, kind of just easing back into it, I think is safe, but also from the fact that we just don't want terrible basketball to malign the first 2 rounds of the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be sloppy as hell.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't want the first round to be that for a team to get by, whatever method it is, to get
even
by.
Even if it's a one loss in the best of 7, it makes.
Right? Or even one loss in a group stage thing affects everything, right? Like.
Oh, right. So you're seeing some exhibition even before that, right? Yeah.
You need to have some degree of.
Yeah, for sure. You're right, and it'll be interesting, man. But like, I don't want to put negative energy out there. Just also keep in mind there's like some bad case scenarios that can happen here, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You're a star player,
for sure,
positive, right? And like I don't want to put the energy out there, but I think the whole adage if you could plan a pretty picnic but can't predict the weather,
yeah,
you might see some. Any thoughts on that? Like
you have that many people there, and I don't think it's going to be a campus environment in the sense that they're locked in. They can go all over Florida if they need to.
Yeah.
But I hope that they'll take it seriously. First of all, it's their money. This is everything.
Wait, they're allowed to leave the Disney place?
They can leave. I've heard they can leave the grounds. They don't have to physically stay in there and stay locked into that.
Oh, well, that's a good disaster waiting to happen.
But the thing is, I think they're planning, and
Florida, like the most irresponsible state.
But also not one of the highest cases. It's not up there.
I guess
specifically to where they're playing, it's the cases aren't high there. In other parts of Florida, yes, but not there. But also the fact that like these guys are going to be tested every single day. And I guess some people are balked at that because the test isn't the most comfortable thing apparently.
So you wanted to get tested tomorrow or something, right?
Not tomorrow. I don't know, man. that's
right up your nose, man.
That's a different conversation.
Right up your nose.
We'll do it on Zoom. We'll do it on the next podcast. I'll take my phone with me. But like it's just they have no shortage of tests.
Yeah.
To determine that, hey, if you step out, you're going to get tested again. But they're pretty much going to
be... Money talks, man. Like, there's a reason Magic Johnson's been alive so long with HIV, man.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, right? But you probably wouldn't. I mean, money talks, right?
This conversation went somewhere, yeah, for sure.
I thought you said we discussed, like, global hegemony and economics on this podcast.
I set up a schedule for this podcast for a reason, and you've completely deviated from that plan. I don't know what's going on right now, but
so what's the proposed date then? It's early July, sorry, or what?
I think they're planning to get teams together by mid-June, and then they're planning for the league to resume by mid to late July. Sorry.
What team do you think, assuming let's say all 20 teams over here have a chance? What team has the most to gain? What has the most? Like, who loses the most over here, and who wins the most over here? That's on the yeah.
That's a great question. I think it actually sucks for Utah because they just lost Bojan Bogdanovic, who's one of their highest.
Well, why is it? Because he has a kid or something that's.
No. He had an injury that he's playing through, but he's one of their more productive role players.
Yeah.
So you go from just being a potential Western upset team to losing.
Joe Ingles' kid is like. Has some kind of odd.
Yeah, but Joe Ingles' comments, he kind of walked that back. He said, "I said that in March when the situation was different." He's like, as long as they are confident in their plan, then I'll play." So he's kind of walked back his comments from earlier. But like, I think Utah's got a lot to lose because obviously they lost out on one of their big players. I mean, whatever you think of Bojan Bogdanovic, whatever. But
and they have the chemistry issue as well too, right?
The chemistry issue with Gobert and Mitchell as well. I mean, they've essentially became such a tight nucleus to a team that I think any team will love to play in the Western Conference, especially in a first round situation or what have you, because I could see Utah being ripe for the picking.
I think we probably agree on who the definitely who wins the most over here is probably the Clippers, right? You
Oh
don't have
yeah,
much of a home crowd. If we're having LA versus LA battle, like they were looking at a potential 7 road game series,
yeah.
right?
You're
So
dealing
which
with a
made
guy
it
who
so
doesn't even.
cool. Fuck COVID, but
Yeah, you're dealing with a guy who doesn't even is the most robotic in a crowd atmosphere, and you put him in a situation where he doesn't need to respond or react to that. It's going to be just another day for Kawhi because he's never gets too high, never gets too low.
too low, right? So yeah, he doesn't need the outside noise, right? I think the Raptors, I think, are also ones that we have such a robust home crowd as well too,
Oh yeah, for
in
sure.
Jurassic Park and stuff.
That's going
But
to be.
man, yeah,
I was just saying that's going to be disappointing because I mean, like you said, Raptors one of the most biggest fan bases. So having that lack of energy from no Jurassic Park is going to suck,
yeah,
especially after the
and
run last year.
yeah, exactly. Our defending titles. I think the Blazers have a lot to gain because I think Yusuf Nurkic might be back.
Zach
But
Collins might be back.
yes, they're dealing with a lot of injuries, and Kevin Durant's not going to play. I believe that's confirmed done,
I think Durant's pretty much been ruled out.
right? Okay,
I don't think it'd be fair to him to come back in a playoff situation.
right.
Probably just want to temper that and get a proper
A
training
fresh
camp for
season,
Kyrie.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
And Kyrie's not going to be back, right?
Kyrie should be back.
Oh, will he?
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
because the
so.
Nets have a bit to gain over there as well. Because it's unique. It's something like literally just like we haven't seen anything, experienced anything like this before in regular life. It's just so unprecedented in
Yeah, it's crazy.
NBA that you don't really know what to expect. Like, I don't know what this game experiences are going to be like. Is it going to feel like those all-star practices are kind of ho-hum, or is it going to feel kind of summer league cool, or will intensity increase as the Browns get deeper when there's no like in real life the fan noise and the hoopla around it gets more intense as well too
Yeah, it's gonna
once
affect officiating too, right?
yeah
Like so
uh,
many different variables, so many different factors that we don't even think of. It's just gonna affect the game on so many different
so a team
ways.
like the Bucks, they lose out because they lose a home court throughout as well.
They
They
have
have the
one of the
best
best home courts. Yeah,
and they have the best record in the league as well too, right? So
yeah, exactly. And now
uh,
they face an empty gym against
who
Orlando.
knows, right? It depends
Like,
on
like
where we
exactly.
are.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's gonna be interesting, man. I think I'm just starved for sports at this point. I've watched it.
Mm,
I mean, I haven't watched as much retro games as you have, but
uh,
I've watched quite a bit. And
oh, you have a life, eh? It's like
man, I've been putting my energy toward other things. I just finished Final Fantasy VII,
oh nice.
so like, yeah, no life. But yeah, no, I'm
And
excited
I
to
think
see
the NBA is also
sports.
trying to avoid the NFL. What's their plan? NFL hasn't said anything yet, right?
NFL hasn't. NFL is actually kind of right in line of where they usually are in terms of their year schedule.
But
At
they're
this
trying to
point,
still pack 35,000 people to the stadium,
no,
or
in the sense of like they don't need to react as much right now.
okay,
Obviously, they think about it, and I do think ultimately they will play without fans. Or with stadiums, you do have the benefit of spreading fans out more.
that's true.
So that could be an option. But the NFL teams, though, it's going to be tricky just because there's so many more roster spots. So
Right, right,
53 people every single week. But
yeah.
before 53, you are going to have over hundreds in training camp that you have to whittle down.
Oh, right,
So
kind
you
of.
have to think about that, and even handling that many people at a site or a facility. It's going to be interesting in the next month or so is when we start seeing the NFL teams start to get back into it.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we haven't seen any effect, but I'm sure in the next month or so, they're still planning for September though.
Okay.
So I know the NBA doesn't want to align with that. They want to finish right before NFL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was good chatting with you, brother.
Yeah, man. No,
Anything else, or we'll
no,
touch base again next week, then, man.
we'll touch base. We'll make this a frequent thing. And yeah,
Easier
no,
than ever now with technology, right? It's
100%. Two guys in IT finally got on the IT train. The latest, actually. I think a lot of other people have done pods before us in this capacity, but no, it's finally good to get on and to present this to people. We're going to be putting this on YouTube. We're going to be putting this on Spotify,
I think
um,
that's well, and all the other usual stuff that we do.
and
Yeah.
all the other stuff. But yeah, no, it's good that we got this out there.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Until next time.
All right. Peace out.